Content warnings: child disappearances, murder, pedophilia, and sexual assault. Tucson, Arizona is a city with a long, complex history. According to the Tucson Indian Center, the Santa Cruz River and the fertile land drew the archaic and Hohokam or Huhugam Indians, and later the Thana Atham and Yaqui. Tucson is one of the oldest continually inhabited places in North America. Around the late 1700s, the first Spanish colonists arrived. They built multiple missions, the most famous of which is the Mission San Javier del Bac, which was built in 1700, razed, and rebuilt from 1783 to 1797, with the labor of the Atham natives. After Mexico won its independence from Spain, Tucson became part of Sonora. 33 years later, in 1854, the U.S. bought Tucson and more, making the area a territory, then a state. The city was even the state's capital for a while, before Prescott took back the honor. But what's Tucson like today? It's a very diverse place, and one of the few places in Arizona to vote blue. It's home to the University of Arizona, contributing to an arty, college town atmosphere. Top it all off with a slightly better climate than the valley, and Tucson looks pretty great. In April 2012, the Solis's must have thought that the city was a great place to raise a family. Mother Becky lived with her husband Sergio and her 3 children, Sergio Jr., 14, Julian, 13, and youngest, Isabel. Isabel was a pretty 6-year-old girl with a radiant smile. Recently, she had just lost her 2 front teeth. She loved gardening with her mother and playing baseball. Purple was her favorite color, a fact easily discernible by her orchid-colored bedroom walls festooned with red, black, and white polka dots. Late in the evening of April 21st, around 11 p.m., Isa was told to go to bed. Her mother would later say she was haunted by this moment. She could have just stayed in bed with me. Becky left around 6 the next morning to go to work, without checking in on the kids, which she rarely did, because she didn't want to wake them. So the first person to discover Isabel's disappearance was her father Sergio. He went to get her up so she could get ready for her baseball game, but she was nowhere. He quickly woke his sons, and they began searching around to see if they could find her. Sergio Jr. was the one who found the window screen broken and lying on the ground beneath her window. He showed his father, who immediately called Becky and told her to return home before he called the police. The 911 call is unfortunate. It would come back to haunt this family for years. Nearly a decade, in fact. And all because Sergio Solis is an awkward guy. But we'll come back to that part when a celebrity makes it a huge issue. Immediately, the area would swarm with police. This case became national news in a hurry. An angelic 6-year-old disappears from her own bedroom in the middle of the night? It's a horrifying story, and everyone was on high alert. Within days, volunteers had mobilized on social media, printing flyers and handing them out everywhere. Many people wanted to help search for Isabel, but the police told them they weren't interested in non-professional searchers. Meanwhile, the police had nothing. Immediately, they zeroed in on the closest suspects to Isa, her family. They searched the home from top to bottom, questioned both the Solises for 12 hours each, and found nothing. Police supposedly found a blood drop in Isabel's bedroom, but I can't find corroborating accounts of this from any credible source. As the days multiplied, the case received the attention of major media outlets. Sergio's call to 911 made the rounds of the networks, and no one was more delighted to sling mud than Nancy Grace. Regardless of your feelings towards Nancy Grace, whether you love her or hate her, she's a figure in the true crime community. But in this case, in particular, she started pointing fingers at the Solises over nothing more than a phone call. Okay, I'm going to use the nerdiest analogy ever to illustrate my point, but here goes. Circumstantial evidence is like chainmail. When you have a lot of good circumstantial evidence, it links to each other and it supports each other and makes a garment of evidence, if you will. Just like one ring alone doesn't make chainmail, one suspicious thing isn't circumstantial evidence. In both cases, they need to be linked to something to have meaning. You can't take a phone call, listen to it, and say, "That person did it, I solved the case." But you can if you're Nancy Grace, who had a wide following and threw journalistic responsibility and integrity out the window. She hired a, quote, body language expert to listen to a phone call and say that Sergio Solis was lying. A body language expert listened to a phone call and says he's lying because he made an awkward joke and laughed during the call. This started the pile-on. It's always upsetting when this happens. As a community, we need to do better than attack people online over phone calls or TV interviews. But this continued for years in which complete strangers would attack the Solises online and on television, saying awful things about them, implying that Sergio had committed sexual violence against his child. The noise was so loud that many people would ignore the event that happened in June 2014. Though twilight had set upon the city, the sun had yet to go down, and the oppressive heat had yet to abate at around 8 p.m. on June 3, 2014. Despite this, 13-year-old Maribel Gonzalez told her mother that she was headed over to a friend's house. Her apartment was only minutes away from Isabel Solis's home. No one can be certain what happened to her in the short distance she had to travel. Likely, she met someone she thought she knew, and they offered her a ride. Ideas about personal safety can get a little muddled when it's 99 degrees in the shade. All we know is that she never made it to her destination. Maribel's mother, Valerie Colonge, was on meds after being the victim of an attack, and she had fallen asleep. When she woke, it was late at night, and her daughter was nowhere to be seen. Valerie tried calling her daughter's friends, but no one had seen her. The family drove around, looking everywhere she might be, but she was nowhere. It was then that they called the police. The police took one look at the case and labeled Maribel a runaway, according to her father, Adrian Gonzalez. You and I both know something more sinister has happened to Maribel, but even if she had run away, that doesn't mean she isn't in danger. This idea that police push that they don't need to look for runaway children is bullshit. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, 90% of runaway minors are considered endangered runaways. And, pertinent to this case in particular, those runaways under 13 are considered to be at high risk. I'd much rather the police say they wasted their time finding a child that wasn't in danger than blow off a missing kid and have something terrible happen. Which is exactly what happened. On June 6th, in a remote area northwest of Tucson near Avra Valley, a body was found in the desert. At first, investigators thought the body belonged to an adult female. They found a tattoo on the body and released a photo to the media, asking for help to identify the woman. Valerie Colonge was watching the news that night. When she saw the small tattoo, she broke down. She had to learn from the news that her 13-year-old child was dead. The news didn't find the case of Maribel as fascinating as that of Isabel. Just searching for information for this episode was like pulling teeth. To give you an idea of what it's like, when I searched Maribel's name on major news sites, I mostly received articles about Isabel, where Maribel's name was mentioned once or twice in passing. I can't be certain why this is, but I'm sure it has something to do with the media's tendency to assign a value to victims. All I can say is that it's shameful that a local newspaper can have dozens of articles on one missing child, and barely a handful on a murdered child. That child was a member of the community. Do better. It was extremely difficult to find out what kind of person Maribel was. I learned she liked to watch motocross with her father. As for sports, she played both soccer and softball. She was active on social media and had thousands of friends. Her father would later be told that many of those friends were adult men pretending to be teenage boys. Wherever the danger had come from, a stalking creature stole her life one dark Tucson night and crept back to its cave to hide. But it wouldn't be able to hide forever. And so things continued for years. Every year on the anniversary of Isabel's disappearance, the Solis's would attempt to revive interest in the case, even though they knew it was like adding blood to shark-infested water. Valerie Calonge and Adrian Gonzalez would also attempt to revive interest, but the media rarely paid much attention. 8 years later, a woman was watching television and saw a story about Isabel. She recognized the name and quickly called in a tip to 911. She recounted how her boyfriend had allegedly told her he had buried that little girl's body in the desert. Her boyfriend's name was Christopher Clements. As of this episode, I know little of Christopher Clements' childhood, but I know his sister has come out saying that it was a loving one. But what we know about Clements is his long criminal past. When Clements was 11 years old, there was an alleged molestation incident where he preyed upon another child. This is probably going to stay a rumor because juvenile records are generally sealed. But there's no doubt that they convicted him of a sex offense in Oregon of 2 counts of unlawful sexual penetration with a foreign object. At 16, they gave him 18 months of prison, the requirement to register as a sex offender, and a decade of what was called community supervision. Whatever supervision there was, it wasn't enough. Clements went to Washington that same year, and they convicted him of assault. Because he pled guilty, he received a year's probation. That same year, he was arrested again, this time for felony identity theft and obstructing a police officer. He was given another year's probation. I don't think that's how probation is supposed to work. If you commit another felony while on probation, you're supposed to go to prison. You're not supposed to be able to upgrade your probation to the next level. Either way, he somehow made his way back to Oregon 4 years later, where he committed felony theft, and they gave him 2 years of probation this time. The same year, he somehow made it to Florida, but whoops, he forgot to do one tiny thing: register as a sex offender. Florida gave him more goddamn probation. A year later, Clements arrived in Tucson. A police officer saw him acting weird and followed him. When the cop pulled him over, Clements gave him 2 fake names. The officer arrested him and searched his wallet for his ID. It was time for failing to register as a sex offender, Part 2. Pima County sentenced him to some prison time this time, 46 months inside and 5 years supervised release. However, Clements successfully appealed his case to the courts and won. Technically, he couldn't be jailed for failing to register as a sex offender, because the federal law that required sex offenders to register everywhere they moved in the U.S. didn't exist when Oregon convicted him in 2002. Clements was free on the streets of Tucson. Clements hadn't stayed free for too long. Allegedly, Clements had burgled a few houses and ended up in jail. When the FBI came to speak to him about the tip they received, he was in the Pima County Jail. No one's sure how the conversation went, but in the end he promised to show them where he had, allegedly, buried Isabel Solis's body if they did 2 things for him. First, they had to drop the pending burglary charges against him. Second, he asked that they remove his car from the Tucson impound. Neither of these requests seemed too objectionable to the FBI agents, so they agreed. Clements took investigators to an area in the desert where he said he'd buried Isabel's body underneath a tree. In a remote patch of Pima County desert, northwest of Tucson, and near an area known as Avra Valley, they uncovered Isabel's buried body. They found Maribel Gonzalez's body in the same place 6 years before. They fulfilled Clements' requests. They released his car and dropped the burglary charges. However, Maricopa County immediately filed charges for burglaries he had committed in the valley. They transferred him to the Maricopa County Jail in Phoenix. Investigators did a lot of investigation in the ensuing months. They filed several warrants on places that included the home he shared with his fiancée and his jail cell. To say they found a mountain of evidence would be under-exaggerating. They found child pornography on Clements' computer. It is unclear to the public whether Maribel and Isabel were in any of these photos. Detectives found many letters from Clements to his then-fiancée. Somehow, these letters had made it out of the jail without inspection. In a letter, Clements had written there were 4 bodies left in the desert. I'm not sure whether this means there are 4 bodies besides Isabel or Maribel, or whether that includes them. While searching the backyard of the house where Clements' fiancée had lived, police found a plastic bin. Inside the bin was a child-sized sweater and schoolwork with the name Mercedes misspelled with a Z on it. Isa's middle name had been Mercedes. In addition to this, Clements' cellmate had a lot of information to give investigators. As a side note, I'd like to say that I'm not a huge fan of jail informants. I'm not sure what the cellmate is getting out of his testimony, and I'm not at all sure the following is credible. However, the informant told how Clements had allegedly discussed the case with him in third person, but often had slipped into first person by accident. According to the informant, Clements had no intention of keeping Isabel alive when he took her. He took her to a part of the desert where, quote, illegals went, and strangled her before pouring chemicals over her body. He then allegedly took his car to a car wash and spent over $100 having it cleaned out. He also showed the informant several photos of Isabel's home he had kept in a Bible in his jail cell. Leaving jail informants behind, they had found a partial DNA sample on Maribel's body that matched Clements'. While partial DNA is better for excluding potential suspects than including them, that the DNA can't exclude the best suspect is somewhat telling. On September 14, 2018, 2 detectives traveled the 116 miles from Tucson to the Maricopa County Jail to read the 22-count indictment to Christopher Clements personally. It included several charges I didn't expect, but I guess Pima County felt like multitasking. The charges included 2 counts of second-degree burglary, 1 count of theft by controlling stolen property, 1 count of trafficking in stolen property, 14 counts of sexual exploitation of a minor, 2 counts of kidnapping, and 2 counts of first-degree murder. I guess Pima County only agreed to drop the charges. They never agreed they wouldn't charge him again. The maliciousness is kind of delicious. On their way to trial, the county prosecutors filed for the death penalty twice in this case. However, to many people's very great chagrin, the death penalty is not being pursued in this case now. Tucson elected a new county attorney, and one platform she ran on was not pursuing the death penalty. When she won, she did exactly what she had promised, and that meant rescinding the filings from the previous county attorney. This was a fairly unpopular decision amongst a group of people who believed that such a heinous crime deserved death. Spending life in an Arizona prison with dangerously poor food, inadequate or no air conditioning, terrible medical care, and legalized slave industry seems worse to me than a needle in your arm. But what do I know? Keeping in mind that child predators rarely do well inside, I doubt that life in prison seems like an escape to anyone. It certainly must not have seemed so to alleged murderer Christopher Clements. His lawyers filed a motion on March 29, 2019, to have the court reconsider several counts. They didn't specify these motions in any of my sources, but I can guess that they asked for the dismissal of the murder and kidnapping charges based on their arguments. His lawyers argued that the state hadn't presented enough evidence to the grand jury about the charges in question, and specifically tried to pass the blame onto Sergio Solis. The county attorneys responded with a 39-page response, which contained 595 pages of exhibits. They came fucking prepared. They listed their evidence, and this gives us the best idea of the state's case to this point. This evidence included the fact that Clements spent $110 to have his car washed the morning Isabel disappeared, and that his cell phone pinged off cell towers by Avon Valley and Trico, where they found the bodies, and at different times. According to the prosecution, Clements had a thing for Acuras. More accurately, he ran a car repair side hustle and he specialized in Acuras. His own car, the one he had bargained with the FBI to get released from police custody, was also an Acura. Either way, before Isa's disappearance, a man had approached the Solis house and asked about purchasing a red Acura parked in the driveway. He matched Clements' description. On an iPad belonging to Clements, there were some stalkery photos of young Latinx girls in their front yards or in front of their homes. Investigations have linked a lot of these girls to locations around Pima County. A controversial piece of evidence in this case is a thumbnail image that appears to be a selfie of Clements in his car with a child that, according to the county attorneys, bears a striking resemblance to Isabel Solis. Clements and his lawyers attest the photo shows his 1.5-year-old son. When shown to that child's mother, she didn't identify the child as her own. To play devil's advocate in this case, I've seen that photo. If the black and white version released to the media is the only version, I don't think there's any way to tell who's in it. It could be a girl with dark hair, but it's equally likely to be a baby smiling under a blanket, as the defense says. In response to the accusations against Sergio Solis, the prosecution had this to say. Sergio Solis may have been convicted by the court of public opinion based on rumor, gossip, and speculation. But now that evidence of these crimes has come to light, no reasonable grand juror could conclude he had anything to do with his daughter's disappearance. The judge granted the defense more time to prove their case about throwing those charges out, but I couldn't find any more references to it. It's probably safe to say they denied the motion. The defense would also try for a change of venue, but that was definitely denied. The judge replied that the county courts were more than able to handle both homicide cases against him in a, quote, timely fashion. And that's where we are. Maribel Gonzalez's case is supposed to be tried in 2022, and Isabel Solis's in 2023, but I'm not holding my breath. If you look at the status of Brian Patrick Miller's trial for the 90s canal killings, we can see that justice in Arizona can be slow. There's a bitterness to making these families wait for justice. A bit of me is enraged that families had to wait so long to find out what happened to their daughters, and have to wait longer to see if the jury will convict the alleged killer. So much of this case hits me personally. Just cracks the protective walls I built for myself. I'm angry that the Solis family went through so much harassment for absolutely nothing because of a lack of responsibility from a public figure who should goddamn know better. I'm angry that Maribel's family didn't get as much media attention. Maribel feels like a footnote in her own murder trial, and it's not right. She was a caring, funny girl who's gone forever from a family who loved her. She'll never play softball or soccer ever again. She was somebody's child, and she mattered. And I'm just enraged that this happened. How is it that our justice system will lock up nonviolent men for life for marijuana offenses, but a man with Christopher Clements' rap sheet goes free to allegedly kill 2 girls? How do we trust in a justice system that continually fails us? Thank you for listening to A Memory of Malice. I'm always so thrilled to see that people have listened to my podcast. Don't forget I'm doing a swear jar for charity, and August charity is Child Crisis Arizona. Link in the details. If anyone is interested in supporting me in trying to make this podcast, I'm unemployed and I work full-time on researching, writing, and recording this. I made a Patreon. It's patreon.com/amemoryofmalice, or you can click the link in my link tree. And you'll get cool stuff like your name at the end of every YouTube episode, AMAs, polls for the subject of future episodes, and access to a private Discord server. The Patreon is $3 a month, and there's only one tier. If you feel like supporting but don't like commitment, I also have a Ko-fi at kofi.com/amemoryofmalice. If you can support me monetarily, I would be so grateful. But I'm also grateful just to have you all listening to me. Nothing makes me happier than to have you support me in any way you can, and that includes listens, likes, comments, etc. I love you guys. Stay safe and stay hydrated. It's hot out there.